battle of the eagle and the serpent.
Okay, great. So let's look into some of history and what we've seen with the battle of the eagle and the serpent. When we look at as far back as we can look at ancient advanced cultures in places like Egypt in Mesoamerica, we find these gods of antiquity that are worshipped by nearly every advanced culture of the past. And a lot of us think that they're merely myth, and they think of as some whimsical imagination to describe the times that were confusing based on lack of technology. But what we're looking at is the idea that it all connects back to the same place, to this forgotten war between these factions over the right to free will between mankind. And so we're going to look at evidence to really see if there really is this hidden battle between the eagle and the serpent.
Yeah, that's great.
So,
now, let me ask you before we get started, because
sure.
the serpent has been talked about for thousands of years, and it is considered by many cultures to be knowledge and nothing evil at all. And with the research that you have done, have you compiled that same synopsis?
That's exactly what we're going to kind of come to as a conclusion here. Really what we see is an inversion of everything, especially the things that really matter, the things that are important. And when we start to look at what really is the case based on evidence and hard truths, looking at cuneiform tablets and a lot of these ancient writings that have been left from pre-religion, we can find that the serpent is nothing like we think it is. The serpent and the dragon have been extremely misrepresented, and there's a reason behind that. And so the very reason behind how that's been misrepresented is because of one of these two brothers. So for over 100,000 years here on the earth, there's existed this ancient battle between the gods of history over mankind. And this battle has been waged between these two Sumerian gods. On the left, known as Enki, known by the Greeks as Poseidon, and this is his statue. One of his statues is Poseidon, you can see. And he is symbolized as the serpent. So any serpent knowledge and dragon knowledge is represented by his family side. And on the right, this is the famous Enlil, known to the Greeks as Zeus. And of course, everybody knows who that is. And he is represented by the eagle. And Enlil was known by the Sumerians as the Lord of the Air. And the mighty eagle was a fitting symbology for him, being that he was kind of the war god. His title was not the war god, but his actions certainly showed that. And then, of course, Enki was kind of the opposite. He was the Lord of the earth and the oceans. And as you'll see, kind of their mentality follows this dualistic side of, one being completely the opposite of the other. And that's really what has ruled this story all along. The information we're about to go over has been heavily suppressed. And when you see where it leads, you'll know why. Because once you know the truth of the eagle and the serpent, everything in your reality can change based on that information. The truth is true. It really is profound, and it connects back to not only our Anunnaki parents, but the reason why they've been fighting for so long. So we think for a moment about the serpent, this scary idea of the serpent. And we look at all the different times throughout history when it's been thrown under the bus and inverted to this idea of being a dark, evil thing. And we look and we wonder why. And we see that there has been this purposeful reason that the eagle in the church for thousands of years has been hunting and destroying the knowledge that connects back to the serpent. So if you want to look at the truth behind philosophy and all the most pure sacred knowledge that can come back to kind of who we really are and understanding the world around us, it always ties back to the serpent. And once you see the evidence that we're going to show on all the flags and crests, see, that's where the true knowledge of knowing which country was ruled by which governing brother is found by looking at flags and the family crests that go way back to the earliest history. So let's take a look at some of these. You can follow the rise and fall of civilizations based on whether their flag or their origins were based on this eagle or serpent. And most of them of course, have an eagle on them because the warring powers of the world have seamlessly won for the last couple thousand years. And so this secret war can be seen on flags and crests in nearly every single country in major advanced warring culture in the past. And the eagle always adopted the crest that later would become that warring superpower. So let's look at some of the empires of the past to see if we can kind of track down this eagle. And we find, of course, the most famous of all would be the Romans, and then of course the Nazis. And both of these empires largely were focused on war as their means of their focus for this culture. You know, some cultures are focused on acquiring knowledge and researching and just developing great libraries. Like Alexander the Great was founded, you know, the Library of Alexandria. But then you have other civilizations, you know, controlled by the eagle, where their focus is about dominating other cultures and acquiring all of their resources. And so if we look back to what was on each crest, we can figure out what the motives and what the control was behind that. So, and a lot of people listening to this are probably living in the United States, and it's by no means a coincidence then that you can see that the U.S. has been at war for the past something like 225 years or something in there, and we've had the eagle represented as almost an entire time. So we have to, you know, not hold back our feelings about nationality and about feeling towards certain places, and just realize that, you know, we're just people playing our part in each one of these different land masses. And it isn't about, you know, what country we're living in that we want to fight against the other one about. It's just learning the truth about what has happened in our history, and that's what we're going to do right now. So if we look at things like the conquest of the Americas and famous figures we learn in history like Columbus and Cortez and Pizarro, we see them as being the heroes of the story. But then if you look at evidence and what it shows, in the Anunnaki series we've done with Gerald Clark, we show that battle in Mesoamerica, the conquistadors coming over and basically destroying what we'll see is this serpent knowledge. And this is showing one of the past crests of the Spanish Empire. And that, of course, follows these conquistadors conquering all of these different lands of the serpent. So when we look, especially in places like Europe, Turkey, and Russia, we find this eagle back to the earliest cultures we can find of these advanced warring cultures. This is the Byzantine eagle found in Turkey, and of course, probably the most famous because of some of the other portrayals in like the Illuminati and other things. But this is in the Rothschild family crests and various things. But this is the Russian Federation crest, and this is the Byzantine eagle is present here, and you can see. My favorite image in the center, if you focus on the center, you see a knight there, and he's slaying a serpent dragon right in the center. And that's just such a fitting symbology for the eagle and all the conquering that it's done all over the world. And so
let me jump in.
Go ahead.
Because I think of the, you know, role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, Lord of the Rings, and it's always the dragon that's the evil one that has all the gold, all the power. And you wonder sometimes, you know, with the possibility when there was an article that came out several years ago that I remember reading on Yahoo News about how there's been several species of humans, everything from dwarfs to blue people. And then you think, well, could there have been elves? Could there have been dragons? What about dinosaurs? Could dinosaurs be dragons? Could they be one and the same? Could they be an offshoot of dinosaurs? I mean, that would make logical sense if you really think about it. And then if you look at countries like China, I know China really boasts the dragon, so maybe they haven't been overcome by the Enlil eagle yet.
That's right. You actually touched on something very important there right at the end. If you find civilizations that still have strong connections back to either the dragon or the serpent, then they are often the ones that were not able to be corrupted by the eagle. And as you said, Japan and China, you see some of the more mature civilizations where they practice very deeply with martial arts and spirituality, and you can kind of see that, and you can see that strong correlation, and that's what we're actually going to dig right into that. So let's look at this for a minute. You can kind of look around the world and follow this by following the flags and crests of the various countries all throughout the world. You can see that the past is ultimately the ultimate history lesson really in finding out the truth. It's the telltale mark that gets left behind to the real story of which gods either created civilizations and turned them into a prospered state, or turned them into a warring civilization and often corrupted them, and then many of them collapsed later on. That's the very reason why we've seen so much of our history of war and tyranny here from so many kings and past empires. And the eagle has been used kind of to do the evil bidding for mankind, and this false perception that has been given that these ways are simply our leftover barbaric evolutionary traits. I want to say that if you look at ancient writings, even in many places in the Bible, it says that kingship was lowered from heaven, and you can read that in many places and see that this hierarchy, warring dominationship, this is from the Enlil eagle side. This does not come from simply some barbaric leftover trait that we have. And so the reason that's important is that a lot of people will use that to blame us for our actions, saying that we're the very reason for all of this simply because we were evolving. But really, you can see that that's not the case at all. And really, it's been the opposite. We've been held back and forced into this warring culture so that so many generations would go by until it became considered normal. And then that's why everyone thought that war was a means of just being like an everyday thing, when in reality it's not. It couldn't be further from the truth. So the eagle symbology is not only referencing Enlil, but it's his entire faction of his family. So Enlil had several sons, had many sons. Two of them in particular, one was named Ninurta, and the other one is Iskar-Adad, the war god and storm god. And they became a powerful imponent sons of Enki and his son Thoth in Marduk. So right there you see you have Poseidon and Zeus, and then they each have children who are fighting against each other in factions. And one civilization is created, taught through the serpent knowledge, and the other one is then attacked by the warring gods and then corrupted by blood sacrifice and those means. And you can follow that all throughout history. And so this battle between the families simply utilizing mankind's early primitive ways, it was just fighting between this battle and serpent knowledge, because Enki and his family always aspired to creating civilizations that were based on the teachings of the creator of all, and about expanding consciousness and becoming who you really were, and about utilizing the earth around you in the universe. It was about kind of a collective consciousness, a global consciousness, and a universal consciousness. And Enlil's side has always been about the war dominating culture of just taking resources and kind of being a powerful military might. And so you can follow that with all these civilizations throughout history. And we can go through some of those right now. So Ninurta, one of Enlil's sons, he really, to me, is the great puppet master underneath his father behind the Roman Empire and a lot of these conquering war empires. The Byzantine eagle, known as the double-headed eagle, is his symbol. So anytime you see a double-headed eagle, it's run by one of Zeus's sons, known as Ninurta, who is the god of war. And so this is also called the Byzantine eagle, which came out of Turkey. And that's kind of where this story kind of begins. And so if we look at where the beginnings of where the eagle was able to conquer and take over, it kind of began with the Romans. In 313 AD, the Roman Empire, Constantine I, decreed that Christianity became the official religion of the people in the empire. And this may seem really a peculiar move to most who follow history, since the Roman Empire has persecuted the following of Christianity for years, with, of course, the crucifying of Jesus being the most famous example of all. So it may seem strange all of a sudden that they turn around and they start embracing Christianity. Thousands have been killed and persecuted by the Roman Empire. So why all of a sudden would the Romans change their stance? How many countless Christians and those following the early serpent knowledge did they crucify and kill, only to then embrace it later? This was the critical moment that represents the point when the ancient Gnostic serpent teachings of the past were taken by the mighty eagle and edited, rewritten, and turned into the ultimate form of control by stripping its purpose down to worship false gods, which demanded war and sacrifice. So if you go read the modern Bible, you'll see that there are places in there where you can if your wife is not faithful or whatever, it's okay for her to be stoned to death, or all these really just horrible things in there. And those are all the remnants of the fact that what was originally pure knowledge and wisdom was rewritten for control. And we can go further into that. In 330 AD, as a Roman Empire lay in pieces on the brink of collapse, Emperor Constantine I decided to move all of his forces and power to a new capital called Constantinople, which in northern Turkey, which eventually became Istanbul, in honor of his supposed greatness. So he just named the entire city after himself. So there, the Roman Empire reorganized under the previous failing model, and they decided, instead of just conquering others in terms of kind of a blind race, they were going to kind of change their tactic, and they targeted religion as a kind of a psychological control. And they realized that religion was the ultimate way you could make people fight for you, by making you believe that something was willed by the gods, or willed by God in their case. So we look at the Byzantine eagle then spread its way across the world and infiltrated religion, and they were able to rewrite a lot of these teachings. And you can still find this double-headed Byzantine eagle in a lot of these Catholic churches still. This is one in Spain, and you can still find that today. It's a remnant of the past. So with vast armies now at their disposal, because as you can remember, the Roman Empire collapsed, but because they reorganized it in Turkey, it was able to kind of take on the Christian Empire in the Holy Lands. And that's kind of how the Roman Empire was able to survive in a different form. And it became essentially the Christian Empire. So basically, with their vast armies, they were able to control this ancient Gnostic and pagan wisdom by conquering the lands and destroying anything they found that wasn't following this decree of that was decided by these kings of Christianity. So we're going to find out what knowledge really was lost about the serpent, and it has nearly been lost, and what we can find by looking at the true evidence that's left now. And the place to find that knowledge, to see where it originally came from, is a very unexpected place. And most people would laugh at you, and a lot of people would laugh if they heard the idea of a place like Atlantis. Yet Atlantis is spoken about in so many different, past writings, and there's concrete evidence that it truly existed. So, west of Morocco in the Canary Islands, according to all of the legends and the writings that we've been handed down, existed once a subcontinent that was named after, of course, our Atlantic Ocean, called Atlantis. And it was a large island subcontinent landmass, and we find that information on who told us where it came from, and the most valuable record comes from Plato, of all people. And if we look at Plato and the works that he's done and the influence that it's had throughout society, it's kind of peculiar, I think, and amazing that when he talks about Atlantis in his writings in places like the Timaeus and Critias, people decided to ignore that. But where all of his other writings that talk about philosophy, those are okay. And so there's selective knowledge that's been chosen here. But Plato himself talked extensively about Atlantis, and he said it existed 9,000 years before him, or somewhere around 12,000 years ago. And so in some of Plato's writings, in the Timaeus and Critias, he mentions that Plato can be found west of the Pillars of Hercules, which if you look into what the Pillars of Hercules are, you can see that there's strong evidence that says that it's the Straits of Gibraltar. And then it begins to make sense with all these maps. It really begins to connect when you look at these maps and you see, okay, it lines up exactly with what Plato and a lot of these other people said. Well, what was in Atlantis that was so important? We got to start wondering what made Atlantis so important. Everyone talks about the legends of Atlantis and all the things it left behind. Was it simply just a utopian city that had a beautiful, pure place? That's not what really mattered the most. And you're going to see that the serpent knowledge that extended all throughout the world, that became the pagan and Gnostic knowledge, it simply was the serpent knowledge from Atlantis.